Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining in. I'm very excited to share this talk with you all. This has been a great JConf so far, and I cannot wait to watch the other talks. And I know this is pre-recorded, but I know the event is going to be awesome. It always is, so I'm super comfortable and confident to say this beforehand. So the name of my talk is Learnings and Tales from Building a Games Accessibility Service. Making this talk was an interesting exercise for me because it required me to go through a lot of introspection and deep dive into my own processes, my own goals, and my philosophy surrounding accessibility in gaming. If you have any questions, you can head to the GAConf Discord and I will happily answer them either during or after the talk. So before we start, who am I? My name is Emiliane F. Chiasson. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white woman with mid-length curly brown hair. I am wearing eyeglasses, and today I am wearing a red t-shirt with the quote, "The future is accessible" on it, as well as a dark blue blazer. So I'm closing in on 10 years combined in the games industry. I've worked in QA, user research, and accessibility. I am a neurodivergent serial dabbler. I have a lot of different passions, a lot of different things that I love to do in my free time. I'm a cats and dog mom. I'm a huge horror fan, and I am currently playing Fae Farm as well as Baldur's Gate 3. What are you currently playing? So before anyone asks, because I know people are going to be asking, who are the animals? So I have Nova, who is a very cute calico colored cat. I have Wendigo, who is a gorgeous tabby cat with most part of her left ear missing. And I also have Saku, who is a Shetland sheepdog, who is black and white. And we also have 5 Danio pearl fishes, who we just collectively call the boys because we don't know which is which. So before moving into the rest of the talk, I wanted to give you some context and background, to give you an idea of where I came from and what led me here. So prior to joining Player Research, I was working in a company called Square Enix at Eidos Montreal. So full context now, Square Enix doesn't own Eidos Montreal anymore. Eidos Montreal is now owned by a company called Embracer Group. But for the better part of my career, Eidos Montreal belonged to Square Enix. So that's what we're going to say. So I was working at Eidos Montreal, but for Square Enix. Hopefully you're following me. So there I worked in QA. I then worked in user research. And I was then very lucky to help build and lead the very first accessibility department at the company. And we helped team deliver accessible experience to as many players as possible. I was able to grow the team by 1. And that person is now leading accessibility there. Rodrigo, shout out to you. He's amazing. And yeah, there was a lot of firsts, all throughout my career. I experienced a lot of firsts. I learned a lot. I have a lot of very fond memories from working there. And honestly, this is where I grew up, not only as a professional, but as a person, really. But, after many years of being there and, working in different types of fields, I knew that accessibility was my calling, but I was going a bit into like an existential crisis because I didn't know, while I knew that accessibility was what I wanted to do in gaming, I didn't know what form it needed to take for me to feel fully fulfilled in my work and impactful in my community. So I started to work on my free time on something called Accessibility 360. This was kind of like my personal sandbox into researching and working into what I really hoped, not only for myself, but also for the accessibility mission as a whole. And eventually this all transformed into me joining Player Research. Player Research is a user research services company. They've been operating for almost 12 years. And they are owned by a company called Keywords Studios. Keywords Studios is a huge company that has different services and game studio company that cover really the entire cycle of making a game. So if you've worked on a game before, there's a good chance that there's a bit of keywords in that game. So that's where I am at the moment. So before working for Per Player Research, I wanted to allow myself to run wild, just for a moment. Because while I was aware of the different realities and challenges and limitations of, working in corpo land, I really wanted to allow myself to think, create, learn, and develop in a boundless land of creativity and imagination. When you do this, you will end up in really exciting places that you would have never dared to go to before. This is more than a thinking outside the box experience. It's literally refusing to acknowledge that the box exists until you can't ignore it anymore. It's an exercise that really refueled my passion for gaming in a lot of ways because it felt like I was reconnecting with my inner child, dreaming of what I would do as an adult, if that makes sense, and re-reaching an unjaded level of imagination that I haven't explored in a very, very long time. Then, of course, I had to snap back to reality, but with a newfound sense of pride, motivation, and hunger to face all sorts of challenges. For the first time in a really long time, I didn't feel shaped by the challenges and realities of Corpo Land, but empowered to face it all with courage and audacity. So the thing to keep in mind when you go into Corpo Land is that it also comes with perks, especially in a field like accessibility. I feel like even though all the ideas and projects that were conceived outside of Corpo Land didn't end up being exactly as I had imagined, I now feel like I can have an actual focus into acting and concentrating on doing instead of just imagining, if that makes sense. Of course, all of this will depend on the type of company that you work with or that you join, but in my case, I'm really happy with where I ended up. So like I said, I ended up joining Player Research in June of 2023, and I'm super proud of it. Not gonna lie, I am working with a wonderful team of passionate individuals, and I could not be happier. I had a lot of help along the way in making this happen. However, I really truly believe that I would not have landed this opportunity if I didn't advocate for myself and dared to build something that was ambitious and something that the accessibility cause deserved. As we were starting to work on this service, there was a lot of questions that kept popping into my head. But the main one was, who am I really working for and how do I represent them properly? And here I don't mean as an employer, I mean the communities that we're working for. Because if we're going to be building a service for the industry, we needed to nail this down in a way that was logical operations-wise, ethical, of course, but also marketable. So we have, let's say, 3 or 4 key communities, right? We have the game developers that are working with independent accessibility consultants, as well as creators that I'm grouping together for now for this purpose, but we'll get into it a bit more later. And then we have the players. So there's like 3/4 communities that, exist in the accessibility field. This is simply put, of course, there's a lot of different layers, sub-communities, things like that. But for the purpose of this exercise, let's say that there's 3 or 4. So like I said, game developers need to work with consultants to create accessible gaming experiences for players, but players can also work with game developers to give feedback and for developers to address barriers that are noticed by the community, either through playtest, during development, or even after launch. Devs also need to work with disabled creators to provide them with access to games to better inform players and create hype around their title. And those players consume content to make purchase decisions oftentimes. So now the issue is that many of those relationships aren't actually happening, or when they are, it's usually far from ideal. The communities are all there, but there's currently a lot of gaps of knowledge, tools, services, and experience that prevent each of those groups to fully fulfill their responsibilities and needs while having a fruitful relationship with each other. So during this process of developing the accessibility service, whether it was the user research, the production strategy consultancy, the accessibility quality assurance service, etc., We knew that we needed to keep these communities at the core of each of our initiatives, because while we might aim a lot of our services to game developers and publishers, for example, we can't forget the audiences that we are ultimately here to serve. So that's how we came up with 3 golden rules. Now, to be fully transparent, none of these rules are things that we've created from scratch. You've heard these phrases before and these sentences before. It's just the 3 that we chose to use as a guiding, set of rules for us to really stand by. So here are the 3 of them. So there's nothing about us without us. This is a very classic one. I'm sure you've heard it before. This is about including disabled players as often as possible, empower and hire disabled consultants, and push for the inclusion of disabled content creators in influencers relations programs. Then we have progress over perfection. This is about helping teams identify objectives and goals that they can confidently commit to. I really believe that slow, consistent steps forward are better than running full speed into an unforeseen brick wall, right? And then the last rule is meet them where they are. Everyone is at different phases in their accessibility journey. Some people don't even know where they should start right now. And some others are leading the pack and innovating and are currently simply lacking bandwidth in achieving their accessibility goals. We needed to be flexible in our approach to meet those various needs. If we fast forward a bit, so like I said, I joined Player Research, right? But we were far from done here. By the way, this is Seb Long, Managing Director at Player Research, huge part of making this happen. But yeah, remember what I said about the different communities? Well, we had to talk to them, didn't we? Because I can get philosophical and make neural boards all day, but if we're not actually interacting with those people, we're not doing much, really, right? So we went through basically an entire summer of R&D, meeting with developers, pre-existing clients. We got our website revamped for accessibility. We did focus groups with accessibility and disability and gaming consultants, community outreach, and so much more. We attended conferences, events, things like that. We did a trailer, worked on the branding of our project with our branding agency called United Us. And this is how we chose to go with advancing accessibility. All right, so what did we learn exactly, right? So let's go over some highlights of what we've learned at Player Research this summer, right? So full transparency, we'll start with points that aren't very positive, but I promise that we'll finish this section with a good note. I promise, don't worry. So let's start with some learnings about game dev. So accessibility is still seen as a risk rather than an opportunity by some. More advanced, mature studios in accessibility have a challenge finding advanced accessibility specialists with game dev knowledge for either internal hires or consultancy. There's an overall lack of bandwidth and resources to meet accessibility goals because full-time accessibility teams are either extremely small or even non-existent. Huge need for dev tools. This is not any news here. There's a lack of available advanced accessibility and inclusive design training, as well as resources in the industry currently for advancing accessibility. Internal champions and full-time accessibility professionals are still facing ableism and discrimination from leadership and colleagues. Now, if we go on the accessibility consultants and creator side, we have people who struggle to get paid fairly and on time. Plus, there's a lot of regional challenges regarding income as a disabled professional. The part about being paid fairly and on time, by the way, is very common and quite unacceptable if you ask me. People are often hired late in production, which can really reduce the amount of actionable, fixes or actions that you can take to retroactively remove an accessibility barrier, right? There's a feeling of tokenization when it comes to consultants being hired because there's situations where consultants are being hired, but actually nothing is being done based on their feedback. So their hiring feels more like a performative act rather than a genuine effort to make a more accessible game. I'm not saying here, by the way, that this is the purpose behind hiring these folks. I'm just saying that this is the feeling and the impact that it has on the community in terms of how it looks and how it feels. There's an overall lack of accessible training and career development opportunities for consultants who want to advance their knowledge and experience in accessibility and in gaming. There's struggle to find work due to non-inclusive scheduling requirements, as well as accommodation needs. And there's a struggle to get included and noticed for events as game creators with GameKey's rollouts and being represented like any other non-disabled creators in content creators, programs and opportunities and events and things like that. So if we go on the disabled players side of things, aside of course from games overall being inaccessible to a lot of people, here are some highlights from what we learned from the disabled gaming community. There's a struggle to find accessibility information prior to game releases. Playtesting opportunities often are inaccessible due to requiring in-person participation, and oftentimes the labs are either inaccessible or can even lack accommodations in remote as well. There's a lack of accessibility support by streaming platforms, both for the creators and their communities. And disabled players, as well as their family and friends, will not support inaccessible products. So by leaving, accessibility aside, you are literally actively, making it so less people buy your game, pretty much. And now, like I said, because I said I wanted to finish on a good note for this section, I wanted to expose people here to the challenges that many, many people can relate with. And I wanted you to know that you're not alone in facing these challenges. But, while there's a lot of work to do in accessibility in games, there's a lot that has evolved. And here are some positives that we've highlighted as well. Accessibility is starting to be recognized in mainstream awards, events. More and more companies share accessibility information prior to game releases. Still not something that is, a very common practice, but we're starting to see it more and more. Many, many younger devs, as well as game students, want to make accessibility the focus of their career. This is super exciting, honestly. Like speaking to so many young folks who see accessibility as a career path is extremely hope-inducing, if that's a way to put it. Super exciting to see. Companies and influential orgs are supporting accessibility initiatives more and more. Accessibility is covered more and more by games journalists. That's something that I'm super excited to see as well. And there are great innovative accessibility progress that has been done in the recent years, both in indie and in AAA games. Now, I also want to highlight the fact that accessibility progress is powered by community. This is a given for a lot of people here. However, I think we can all benefit from reminding ourselves that because without the community, without those different groups that I've been mentioning since the beginning of this talk, accessibility would not be progressing at the pace that it is at the moment. There's wonderful individuals who are dedicating their careers in making games more accessible, raising awareness, and using their lived experience for good. There's those freelance individuals, there's people in studios, there's companies, charities, organizations, events like this one that are all contributing to accessibility moving forward in gaming. And so I'm super proud of to be part of that community, and you should be proud as well. These are just a handful of people, by the way. There's thousands of people standing behind this cause, whether you see them online or not. Take the time to acknowledge your presence in this community because you are part of something that is really important and that's bringing a lot of joy to a lot of people. And now, the moment that I'm sure a lot of people have been waiting for, the survey. So earlier this month, we launched a survey called Survey for Game Developers in Academia. the state of accessibility in the games industry. So after we spoke to so many people, attended an industry event, networked, all of that, I felt like we needed to get a clearer picture that was uninfluenced by people in the room, safe from judgment and whatnot. So our survey was really aiming to be, well, first of all, it is anonymous, but it was aimed at game developers and academia, like I said. And I had already booked my talk for JConf at that point, so I figured that it would be the perfect opportunity to present the results here so that we can get more insight to chat about as a community. Some caveats, by the way. Of course, the accessibility community is sort of overrepresented in this survey in the respondents because, you know, as much as we tried to, you know, have reach beyond the communities that we're active with, oftentimes the people who will care about filling a survey about accessibility are people who care about accessibility. So it's kind of like a difficult situation to be in, but there's still a lot of really valuable insight in here, and I hope that you will learn from it. By the way, we will only go through a few of that data in this talk today because I don't think we would have enough time, but if you want to read the full report, I will be posting it in the Discord as well. All right, so let's go over the respondents' profile overview. So 216 responses total to the survey. The top 6 fields that people were mentioning as being the area of focus in their career. Number 1, we have accessibility, unsurprisingly, like I said. Then we have user research, game design, UX, UI. And in number 6, we have art and creative. We have 16% of respondents who were from academia and 77% who were game industry workers. And in those workers, we have 34% who had 1 to 3 years of working experience. Then we have 21% that have 6 to 10 years of experience. Then we have 4 to 5 years of experience at 16%. Then at 12% equal, we have less than 1 year as well as 10 to 15 years. And we have 5% of people who have 15 plus years of experience. So accessibility knowledge. What do people know about accessibility? How have they learned about it? So have you ever heard of accessibility in games before now? This was a question that we asked. And 97% of people said yes, while 3% of people said no. And from what they can recall, in what context did you first hear about accessibility in games? And the large majority of people said at work, which is really interesting. The second place is while playing a video game, and the third place is social media. I was actually surprised by this. I would have assumed that social media would have been either number 1 or number 2. But yeah, it really seems like awareness work that is being done at the office is what works the most. And also while playing a video game is super interesting because I am assuming that there is a rise in exposing accessibility settings and options early in the first boot flow. And so this is really interesting to see as data here. So how knowledgeable would you say you are in games accessibility was another question that we asked. Of course, here we have a bit of an effect that can happen in, you know, how people evaluate their own knowledge and things. So this is not to say that, you know, this really paints the real picture of how knowledgeable people are, but this is how people evaluated their own knowledge and accessibility. So we have 40% of people who said they were moderately knowledgeable in accessibility, 26% who said they were very knowledgeable, 22% said they were slightly knowledgeable, 11% said they were extremely knowledgeable, and 1% said they were not knowledgeable at all. So here's a next section of the survey. We went into more academia. So in games academia, we asked people, to the best of your knowledge, is accessibility in games ever mentioned in the classes that you attend or teach? So we have 45% of people who said yes sometimes, 34% who said yes often, 17% who said no, never, and 3% who said that they're not sure or that they don't remember. I'm not surprised by these numbers, honestly. I think that accessibility has risen in terms of awareness. That being said, 17% of respondents saying that they've never heard about accessibility in their classes is kind of alarming. So hopefully we can change that. If you're a teacher or if you're a student looking to raise awareness for accessibility in your school. You know, there's a very wide community that is here to help. And I'm sure that, you know, you would be quite innovative in really embedding accessibility in your curriculum. So we have also a question about statements here. So we had people agree with different statements. One of those statements was, I have learned about accessibility during my time studying at my school. So we have 40% of people who strongly disagree. This is really interesting to see as well, especially with the graph above. We have 32% who said that they strongly agree. We have 12% who say that they somewhat disagree, and 16% who said that they somewhat agree with having learned about accessibility during their time studying at their school. All right, so moving into the game company's side, we wanted to have people evaluate the level of accessibility maturity from the companies that they work for. So the question was, to the best of your knowledge, which of these best describe where your company is on its accessibility journey? So we have at 35%, the first position is the level 2, engaged. So internal advocates are starting to influence change. Then at the second position, at 22%, we have the level 1, which is first steps. Some individuals may be working on features for the first time and pushing for awareness. Then at the position number 3, at 17% of respondents, we have people who say that their company is consistent. It's the level 3. Best practices are consistently learned, taught, and integrated into process. And then at the position number 4, at 12%, people say that their company is at the level 5, which is leading, aka their company is recognized for innovation and excellence in accessibility. Then on position number 5 at 8%, we have the level 4, which is strategic. There's commitments from senior leadership, and accessibility is a strategic endeavor. And at the position number 6, we have at 5% the level 0, which is nothing, aka there's no current considerations for accessibility within the company. All right, and while we didn't ask a lot of open questions in our survey, this was one that we did, and this is the cloud of the most mentioned terms. The bigger the word, the more it was mentioned by people. So we've identified the main pains and challenges in the industry that workers who responded to the survey are facing, and we were curious about seeing what people wanted to help them achieve accessibility goals. This alone is very much a can of worms in itself, but it's very interesting nonetheless. So the question was, what tools or resources need to be created in order to help you and others advance accessibility in the games industry? So a lot of these words, so for those who can't see the bigger words that are here, there's standard, engine, guidelines, easy, test, industry, resources, requirement, support, unity, player, feature, design. There's a lot of these, but it's really interesting to see where people's heads are at, and I'm super curious to see what you people think about these answers. Now, accessibility and AI. This is a question that we didn't have in a survey at first, but a lovely gentleman who will recognize himself proposed that we should be adding this question in. And the question is, in your opinion, should AI, artificial intelligence, for those unaware, play an important role in the mission of making games more accessible? And here's the results. So we have 59% of people who said probably yes. We have 18% of people who said probably not, 14% of people who said definitely yes, and 9% of people who said definitely not. So we have a lot of differing opinions here, and there's two quotes that I sort of picked out that kind of really represent the overall feeling that people are saying, because people were invited to comment on their answers in an open box comment. So the first quote was, while I think there is an ethical consideration to be addressed, regulated when utilizing AI, I think it could, if used correctly, potentially help players gain more accessible gaming experiences and help advocates achieve the vision of making games playable for everyone. Then we have another quote that says, although I think there are likely ways it could be useful, I am very worried about AI being ableist. These two quotes really sort of give a pretty accurate picture of most of what people were saying. AI can be a very useful tool in aiding human work, but it shouldn't replace it. There's a big worry that AI can play a role that can feel like it will replace the lived experience of people. And we should be very careful in not entering that type of area if people are ended up working with AI in order to make their games more accessible. And that's the end for the data for the surveys that I'm sharing on the talk, but there is a lot more in there. So if you want to read the full report, please head to the GAConf Discord. There's going to be other results on DEIB and accessibility in the workplace, other challenges that developers are experiencing, and more. So again, if someone can drop the link in the chat, I would be very grateful. But yeah. So before concluding and leaving you to watching another beautiful talk, I wanted to leave you with some thoughts. So as we were learning a lot this summer, as we were building this, and we're still very much on this journey, I did want to reflect on some personal thoughts that I want to leave with you. So the first of these thoughts is that games accessibility is a land where opportunities are rarely created for you. You often have to create them yourself and sell them. In my two previous roles, I've had to pitch for and build, and with a lot of help, I've had to build them from almost scratch. You have to be audacious. It's a lot of work. It's very taxing at times, but that's the reality that we're in at the moment. Don't hesitate to ask for help, but don't spam people in DMs. Use the proper channels and communities that exist for this purpose. Another thing is to never feel bad for asking to get paid. On the contrary, never sell yourself short. You need to get paid, and you need to get paid on time. I've had an alarming number of freelance accessibility workers tell me that they had to wait more than 6 months, even with agreements that said that they had to get paid within 30 days and all of that, to get paid. This is unacceptable. And this is when people are getting paid, by the way. Some people are doing free work. You should not be doing this. And if you're a company that's hiring accessibility consultants or specialists, you should make sure that they are being paid on time and fairly. This should not be an issue, especially for freelance workers who are relying on the money to pay their bills and put bread on the table. This is unacceptable coming, especially from companies who have budget for this sort of things. And identify the root of problems before going wild with ill-fit solutions. We've seen this a lot in other industries, I put here coughs and signing gloves. I could say other stuff, but I don't want to get sued, for those who know. So you don't want to work super hard on something that nobody needs, or something that will hurt that will hurt the cause. I won't name some of those things. Those who are active in the accessibility community are aware of some of those solutions that are being sold as easy things that can fix, accessibility in your products. This is not the way to go. Another thing is community outreach is key, but your health comes first. Community outreach can come in many forms. You need to find what works for you. Not every accessibility advocate is on Twitter. You don't necessarily have to be. Find what works for you and what, makes community outreach a pleasant endeavor for you. Doom scrolling on Twitter is not the way, except for some people who are just built different. I'm looking at you, Ian, wherever you are in the room. That's it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you have learned while watching this talk. If you are curious about more, if you have questions, I will be on the Discord to answer them. Don't hesitate to reach out. I am at the Slasher Chick on most socials, or you can follow me on LinkedIn at Améliane Chiasson. And I am wishing you a very good rest of GAConf. See you next time.